Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lathika Pai, and with us today we have the founder and CEO of FreshR, Ambika Satapathy. Ambika, welcome. We are very proud of you and to have FreshR as a part of Project Amplify, a program in partnership between Microsoft and Accenture in terms of helping social tech startups like yourself really scale what you're doing. Ambika, tell us about FreshR. What made you start? You had a really phenomenal job at Zomato that you quit and then to start FreshR. Tell us what was the motivation behind that.
Thank you, Lathika. Thank you so much for inviting me for this. And the motivation essentially was that, although I worked at Zomato and at other food and consulting companies as well, the fact was that both me and my husband and co-founder were very clear that we wanted to be entrepreneurs. And we were interested in the food and agri space. So when we first started out, we started out as farmers ourselves. We ran our own poultry farms for a couple of years, eventually converted them into free range poultry farms, which we still operate. And those learnings that we got by being producers ourselves is really what inspired us to set up FreshR and the private limited that it's a part of, Zoofresh Foods Private Limited. The learnings that we got at that time were basically that most of the value chain post production is extremely damaged, is extremely fragmented, and that's really where a startup can come in and add a lot of incremental value using technology. So that's really what our inspiration was.
That's really fantastic that you became a farmer yourself, understood the challenges of being a farmer and what, as a result, you could do in terms of improving the whole fresher experience that you're building through your startup. Ambika, you mentioned to me once that the whole industry in India, the aquaculture industry, is about a $30 billion industry, right? Tell us more about the industry and also what FreshR hopes to do.
Sure. So it's a very interesting industry. Most of the limelight, or what is talked about in the media, is about the seafood industry. But the seafood sector is primarily export oriented, is highly organized. Lots of big listed companies in that value chain. The region that we work in, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, there are a lot of very high quality exporters. But more than 90% of domestic consumption is of freshwater fish and not sea fish. And by freshwater fish, I mean the Indian major carps, the rohu, the katla, the mrigal, those kind of varieties. And the domestic market has not, benefited, or the professionalism of the export sector has not spilled over into the domestic market. So the domestic market remains very unorganized, very fragmented. The production is still a little bit more organized, concentrated in a few states like Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, Gujarat. But the consumption, which is spread across north, south, and east, south, east, and west India, is still very unorganized and fragmented. And again, a lot of the young companies and startups who want to work in this space end up working with a very small percentage of the organized players in this sector, the horeca industry, the institutional buyers, the online delivery, meat delivery players. But they form a very small percentage of the market. 95% of the domestic market is catered through local stockists, distributors, retailers in every rural area, district, small town of India. And if you really want to have a mass market play and build the next unicorn in this sector, you have to solve the problems for that large proportion of the value chain. And that is really what FreshR has decided to do. How can we work with producers and aggregators at the back end, and on the front end, stockists, distributors, village level retailers, small town retailers, work with them and really help bridge the gap between those two, using both services as well as technology.
Sorry. Aquaculture today has got two kinds of fish that you deal with, right? The live fish and the iced fish, and there is a nuanced problem that you're trying to solve for each category of fish. Tell us more about, what you're trying to do and what, other challenges in the retail cold chain, which is still a huge challenge in India. So tell us more about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to use technology to improve it.
Sure. So, like I said, broadly, the domestic consumption is for freshwater fish. Now, traditionally, this freshwater fish is caught in production-intensive zones and then transported across the country in, thermocol boxes or crates filled with ice, right? Now, that can be a scientific process, a properly managed process, if the requisite number or a requisite amount of fish to ice ratio is maintained, right? But very often it's not, and your traders skimp on ice. The goods that are supposed to be delivered within 24 hours take 48 hours. The ice is not replenished, so there's a lot of sort of breakdown in the cold chain that happens in this value chain, right? And without necessarily investing a huge amount in capex, right, in terms of reefer vehicles, etc., if you can just make sure that those ratios are well maintained and best practices are followed without a huge increase in cost, you can make sure that there's a huge improvement in the quality. Traditionally, 25-30% of the produce is wasted post-harvest in this value chain, and that is something that can be prevented if the management practices are correct. One of the nuanced understandings that we developed while in this sector is that while iced fish is extremely popular, if you can provide the live version of the exact same produce, it sells at a significant premium, because to the consumer, you are replicating the experience of going to the pond and actually buying the fish, right? And that has a huge USP in fish eating zones of eastern and southern India. So we experimented a bit with that, and that turned out to be a huge hit. And we like to believe that we are probably the only organized player in this entire country who's managed to perfect the live fish distribution process at any significant scale. So that's a USP that we have. It's something that also brings better margins to the business. It sort of gives FreshR the hallmark that if we can do live fish, we are really truly the freshest provider of produce, right? So that's really the nuance between the two. But the reality is that the most scalable part is the iced fish business, because I can send the produce from Kanyakumari to Kashmir without any additional capital investments. But then the processes need to be followed. It should be preservative free. Ice should be properly managed. The shortest route, fastest delivery. All of those logistical problems need to be solved to get that right. So we are working on both.
Very, very interesting. I agree. You can't get fresher than fish that's just been pulled out of the tank per se, and eating it right then and there. There is something very special about that. What do you see as the biggest challenges? Because you are really working in an unorganized sector, right? Like the export sector for seafood is all, is organized. They have processes in place. There are a lot of middlemen who are associated with this particular sector. What have you seen as the challenges on the ground, and how do you see technology helping you actually, leveraging technology to change this?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question, Lathika, and let me flip it and answer it in a different way. Let me tell you what are not the challenges. So traditionally, what happens is that people think that agri businesses, technology uptake will be a limitation, etc., etc. But one of the good things about the aquaculture industry in India is that, and I always keep telling this to all my investors, don't compare it with the fruits and vegetables value chain. My farmers are fairly commercially oriented, quite professional, quite entrepreneurial. The stockists and distributors at the front end, they behave more like SMEs, right? They're not so small that they're doing 2 lakh or 3 lakh rupee sales a month. Many of them are doing 30, 40 lakhs of sales every month, right? So everybody is fairly professional in the value chain, understands the use of technology, especially because of the first generation changes that have already happened with online payments, apps like Vyapar, all of those things. So we have found it quite easy to sell the technology piece to our users. I think the challenge is that this sector, because it's unorganized, it's very undercapitalized. Like, for example, typically NBFCs tell us that if you were selling to exporters, we would be happy to finance your receivables, right? But because you're selling to stockists and distributors who are unorganized, how do we finance them? So the challenge really is to organize and formalize all these players in the value chain were already doing a good amount of business. None of them are small, so small that they ought not to be eligible for financing, right? But the trick is to bring them on a platform, give them a proper economic financial identity, give them ratings, track their transaction history, make the data available to financiers, insurance, other service providers in the value chain, and you'll see the entire sector, flourishing much faster than many of the other agri spaces where there are so many challenges with dealing with stakeholders. I think here the stakeholders are on the cusp of technology adoption. They are open to it. It's really somebody who has to come and execute well and fill in the gaps really.
Wow, that's really fascinating to know that there isn't a barrier to adoption of technology. They are looking for technology to help them. Ambika, my last question to you is that you've been a part of our Project Amplify, which is a part in partnership with Microsoft and Accenture. How has that really helped you shape your freshers journey and what you plan to do?
So Microsoft and Accenture and Project Amplify actually happened at a very sort of critical juncture of our business. So we are already experienced operators. We've been operating the business for 3 years, and then of course COVID happened, right? And when COVID happened, we knew we had to sort of graduate from our style of functioning, which was a very operations heavy model, to a more scalable digital model, right? In a non-COVID world, it makes sense to go deep and go hard in one geography rather than spreading yourself thin. But in a COVID situation, you have to spread yourself thin if you want to grow your business, because going hard and going deep is no guarantee of being able to operate smoothly in that area. And while we knew that this transition had to be made, we didn't know how to make it, right? And that's where Project Amplify came in throughout the January February period. I think even before the list was announced, they had already started working with us, and we really appreciated that. And they adjusted with our timelines of execution and not their timelines of the program. And that those first 2-3 months, really got us thinking on how this transition can be successfully made. And I would like to believe that if we are one of those companies who don't end up burning money in making mistakes and launching version 2, version 3, version 4, because we've not had a good thought through experience, most of that credit will go to Project Amplify, because they helped us think through in the early days and avoid those cash burning mistakes. So all in all, I think it was a very good way to kickstart our journey, and I would strongly recommend it to a lot of startups. I know everybody wants to go digital these days, but they don't know how, and you'll have all these random consultants giving you advice which makes no sense. So it would be great to be a part of a program like Project Amplify. They'll give you the direction, and then of course the rest is always history. So
Great.
so yeah, I strongly recommend the program.
Excellent. I'm so glad you are a part of Project Amplify. I believe there's some, you have some phenomenal plans for FreshR. I'm just super impressed that just, since we last spoke, which is a few months ago, to where you are today in your journey. Good luck, and look forward to working with you closely.
Thanks, Lathika. It was a pleasure.
Amen.